Good. space in foodborne illness.
There's things about food handling practices within your own kitchen that can help prevent infectious outbreaks of diarrheal diseases.
Dr. Pratish Tosh, a Mayo Clinic infectious diseases specialist, says the majority of foodborne illnesses in your kitchen are caused by cross-contamination of raw meat.
If you have raw meats, handle them carefully.
He says when preparing food, hand washing is crucial. The bacteria you get on your hands from handling a raw piece of chicken, for example, can contaminate not only other foods, but also anything else in the kitchen you touch, like a spoon or the countertop.
The bacteria can stay on that and cross-contaminate something that's going to then touch that spoon or that countertop, and then transmit the bacteria to someone.
To avoid that bacteria, anything that could be washed in the kitchen should be washed, including your food and hands. For the Mayo Clinic News Network, I'm Jason Howell.
In the next segment, we'll explain temperature control, including the danger zone, hot and cold holding, proper cooking temperatures, thawing, and cooling food. Foods must be cooked and held at correct temperatures, and cooks must use a metal stem or digital thermometer to ensure that meat, poultry, seafood, and other cooked foods reach safe minimum internal temperatures.
Obviously, the only way to be sure that you cook something to the right temperature is with a probe thermometer.
Remember, always hold cold foods at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or less. Always hold hot foods at 135 degrees Fahrenheit or above. Most bacteria do not grow at very hot or cold temperatures. The danger zone in which bacteria can grow rapidly between 41 degrees Fahrenheit and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Potentially hazardous foods may not be at room temperature for more than 4 hours. When you're working with food, it's key to work quickly in small batches. Keep the rest of the food you're not working with hot or cold, either below 41 degrees if it's cold, or above 135 degrees if it's hot food. If food has been left at room temperature for an unknown amount of time, throw it away. It can be unsafe to eat. Keeping hot foods hot, also known as hot cooking, is important because cooking in itself does not kill all bacteria, and bacteria resume flow if foods are allowed to drop into the temperature danger zone. To ensure temperature safety, steam tables, and other hot holding units must be turned on and heated up before hot food is put in. Use thermometers to check the temperature of the food and be sure to cover pans and stir food often to distribute heat evenly. And remember to never mix cold foods with cooked foods. Cold cooked food that needs to be reheated to hot holding must be heated to 165 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds within 2 hours before being put onto the steam table to be held at 135 degrees Fahrenheit. The steam table should already be hot before food is placed inside. Temperature control is a strong defense against foodborne illness and injury, and cooking meats is no exception. The guidelines for cooking meat are crucial to keeping customers healthy. Know the proper cooking temperature for each type of meat and check your temperature with the appropriate thermometer. But depending on the type of meat you're serving, safe temperatures can vary. Temperature control is also vital when it comes to handling cold food. When practicing cold holding, always be mindful of the danger zone and keep cold foods at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. Keep in a refrigerator, ice, and growing. When using ice to keep food cold, the ice must surround the container to the top level of the food,
When you're thawing food, it's time to think about the danger zone again.
which would be any time the food is above 41 degrees. Acceptable methods of safely thawing frozen food.
Hey Google, what's 41 degrees Fahrenheit in Celsius?
Sorry, I didn't understand, but I found something else. Do you want to know what is the change into Celsius
Hey, Google.
scale 41?
What is 41 degrees Fahrenheit in Celsius?
41 degrees Fahrenheit is equivalent to 5 degrees Celsius.
Include in the refrigerator.
Capsaicin in chili, foodborne illness.
Hello, I'm Sean, also known as Chili Chunk, and welcome to my channel. In my recent video of 10 facts about chili, I asked if you wanted a dedicated video on health benefits. A lot of you said yes, so there you go. I have listed citations for all the research I've done down below in the description, and there will be an article on my website in the future as well. Chilies are packed with vitamins and minerals. Ripe chilies are one of the richest sources of vitamin C. In fact, a red bell pepper has more than double the amount of vitamin C compared to an orange, and it contains more than your daily recommended amount. They also contain vitamin B6, vitamin B9 or folate, vitamin K1, vitamin E, potassium, iron, magnesium, and beta carotene, which your body converts to vitamin A. I did make a mistake in the last video saying that it converts to vitamin D. That's wrong. It is vitamin A. Most interesting, however, is that chilies contain capsaicin. This is the part of the chili that gives it its spice. Capsaicin is most apparent in the placental tissue, the part that holds the seeds. The seeds themselves don't have or produce capsaicin, but the reason people say to remove the seeds when cooking is because the seeds are coated by that placental tissue. The capsaicin receptor is called TRPV1, or the transient receptor potential channel of the vanilloid receptor family, subtype 1. This was only identified fairly recently in 1997. A member of that team that discovered it was David Julius, and he won a Nobel Prize for this work in 2021, so only last year. Most of the medical benefits I will talk about next are related to capsaicin and the TRPV1 receptor. So, let's get into it. A study was done where hamsters were put on a high cholesterol diet. They were then divided into two groups. One group getting supplements of capsaicin in their diet, and the control group.
Hello? How are you? Alright, have you tried looking into kuma can? Oh, so you should click on the link on piece of product right now, clean yourself. Yeah, I'll hang up on a bunch of different, look. Alright, side. I set up there for sure this week. I'll be able to see it. I thought maybe when we go away, we have it set up like that. Oh, the kuma camp. Oh, yeah, so that's out there on the bridge. You know, back when she's got 10,000 followers. Make more money out of it. Okay. When you make meatballs. Have you had it? Well, that's the most of meat. Using flour and stuff. I split the batch 50-50, and then on half the batch I added the baking soda, and it turned out so well that I added it to the other batch too. You know, it came out so much better that I went back and added it to the other batch. It doesn't crumble, it keeps it together and also makes it juicy. You could make coffee, this meatballs just easy to roll. I just sit through the scale and just weigh out 20 grams and then roll them up. I'll watch TV. Nothing I do. Yeah, nothing I do it. I do it. And it's fresh chili, it's dark chili brownie, so. Nothing I do is cheap. It doesn't take like half a day. It still takes a lot of time. That's why I noticed also when we calls anything that even if it has a remote amount of actual physical labor from a teenager is stuff in the price now. Like skinning the chicken breast, like, oh boy, we actually have to pay someone to take the skin off, even though it takes 2 seconds, now we'll do that with price. And I think that's why the chicken gizzards are got so ridiculous in the prices, because you actually have to take their time to clean it. So I think because they have to pay someone to sit there and clean it, it's down the price because of their wage. Basically anything that's not, that's why whole chicken's cheaper to buy pieces. Now you get a whole chicken for $6 a kilo, whereas pieces, because they have to pay some butcher, that's all. Oh, I don't know. That's like meatballs. So I'm going to come and pick you up tonight. Well, that's the way to do that. So I think tomorrow. It's going to be pieces. And I think you're in some India. I think so. Reason you might do it. It's going to be hot. Yeah, do something. It's going to be hot, so we should do something fairly early in the morning to make them home. That's really cool, but oh well. It is sneaking into society. I hear everyone in the society right now. How much do you think it will cost you to get it from home tonight? That's not the first time I actually said. Wasn't much time. Almost. If I can't sleep tonight, I'll leave. Definitely leave tomorrow. I think you're work tomorrow, and then I'll get a haircut. And I'll pick you up, and then we can go to Tolba. Actually, driving to Tolba at midnight would be kind of fun. Because I've gone there at 4 in the morning before for work. It's quite interesting. Early hours in the morning. That road to Tolba. Usually there's fog recovering all the roads, and you can't see anything. And it's just spooky. Well, is your night going okay? Your night going okay? Not too busy? Kendra gave me a kilo and a half of frozen sausages. Yes, I went to pull them out of the freezer. They're frozen, but they were frozen to the freezer. And when I pulled the Zippo bag, and I tried not to touch them with my filthy hands, and then I got to the car and looked at how do I do this. And I found some trash bags, new ones out of the roll. I put them in that, and when I got to the dump site, I asked the brickies if I could put it in the lunch bag for the rest of the day. And I got it home, and it still was pretty much frozen. So I think that's it. So I defrosted the fridge for a couple hours, and I cut off 3 and I barbecued them. And I ate them, they tasted nice, but I only ate 3, I'm just gonna sit and wait and see what happens. want me to feed them. Yeah, yeah, shredded chicken. Well, that chicken toasty was shredded chicken. Yeah, exactly. And bullshit was. I said it tasted funny. I tell you, I think, you have a good palate, you can taste other things too. I thought it tasted gross. When I bit into it, I'm just like, no, I don't want to eat that. So obviously my palate, well, I still got a bit sick, didn't I? I think obviously my palate was like, absolutely not. If I had added some hot sauce to it, it probably would have been fine. All I can hope is maybe a girl cook it there. Bloody, learn what's up there. You know, cook it there? I still think they probably left it out too long. And had the issues with hospital, what was it? Because supposedly it was hospital sold the shredded chicken too. Nothing, the good, whatever, Samaritan Cafe. My thought was maybe from all the sandwiches left from the cafe there. And how do you go with your lunch? Have you charged it alright? Is it short out? Yeah, but is it a short out? Can you try to charge it? Okay. When I first got it, I plugged in mine shorted out just once. And I think it's because it was brand new and it wasn't in overall. But it hasn't happened since, so. I think it's quite good. Are we going to take some food at the tool bar? We have a little fridge. We have a little fridge up there. Probably should do the same thing, some beans and some. Or you eat out. You can do something a little bit like less healthy, like white rice and beans with some salsa. White rice and beans, quite nice with the cheese. Maybe some chicken, maybe some chicken thighs, and just grill some chicken thighs. I love you. You appreciate it. Alright. Okay, love you. Bye.
Overview proceeding none. When the results were analyzed, the scientists found some interesting things. Not only were the total cholesterol levels reduced, but the capsaicinoids reduced the levels of bad cholesterol without affecting the levels of good cholesterol. They also found that capsaicin was reducing the deposits that were already in the blood vessels. These deposits are what can contribute to the narrowing of arteries that can result in strokes or heart attacks. It was noticed in countries where people eat larger quantities of chilies every day had lower occurrences of functional gut diseases like IBS. A double-blind controlled study was done on the effects of chili peppers on IBS symptoms. Over the 6-week study, it was shown that consuming chilies significantly improved abdominal pain in IBS patients compared to the placebo. Functional dyspepsia, or indigestion with no obvious cause, such as ulcers or acid reflux, is hugely common. In 2002, a study was done which found that eating 2.5 grams of spicy red chilies for 5 weeks significantly improved epigastric pain after an initial period of actually worsening. In another study on patients with non-erosive reflux disease, or NERD, similar results were found. There was initially an increased sensitivity to the pain, but subsequently there was a decrease, quite a significant decrease in the sensitivity and also the symptoms. In tropical countries, chilies are consumed to handle the hot weather by increasing the regulation of heat loss with capsaicin-induced skin vasodilation and perspiration. Back in 1878, researcher Andre Hoagnes was the first to observe the burning sensation produced by injecting capsaicin. The burning sensation resulted in reflex hyperemia, or increased blood flow, without any sign of inflammation. This also resulted in a considerable decrease in body temperature. Further experiments were done in 1950, where a small amount of capsaicin was injected into a rabbit. This dropped the rabbit's body temperature from 36.6 degrees Celsius to a minimum of 30.5 degrees Celsius within 30 minutes. At this point, the temperature gradually began to rise again to normal levels. The effects were far less pronounced when the rabbit was desensitized to the capsaicin. The first formal report of pain-reducing properties of chili extracts concerned toothache treatment. However, long before this, Native Americans would actually rub their gums with chilies to relieve their toothache. Topical use, or rolling on the skin, of capsaicin has been found to be potent in the management of skin disorders, shingles, muscle strain, arthritis-related disorders, diabetic neuropathy, and other pain disorders. It has even been shown to be effective in treating chronic migraines and cluster headaches. In the study that I'll reference down below, the capsaicin was administered nasally, it's not painful. Repeated doses resulted in desensitization not only to capsaicin, but other stimuli as well. The doses were fairly low, but this still caused a burning sensation, which subsided after about 10 minutes. The control group, which didn't get capsaicin, were given low concentrations of citric acid to emulate the burning sensation. The results of the study showed a significant improvement compared to the placebo. A not so fun fact, eunuchs who served the Chinese emperors would rub their scrotums with hot chili extracts as an analgesic before getting castrated. Ouch. TRPV1 receptors are densely distributed in the urinary tract. It is known that TRPV1 receptors are important in overactive bladder diseases, and modulating the receptors can reduce the symptoms. A study was done in 2007, and it suggested that TRPV1 channels play a role in detection of bladder filling. A common human health issue is sudden involuntary contraction of the bladder muscle, which causes an overactive bladder, and capsaicin has successfully been used to reduce bladder overactivity in many of these subjects. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of age-related dementia. Studies suggest that there is a geographic overlap between Alzheimer's incidence and spicy food consumption. A study found that intake of capsaicin reduced brain amyloid beta burden and rescued cognitive decline in APP/PS1 mice. These are mice with mutations associated with early onset Alzheimer's. Amyloid beta, those are the main components of amyloid plaques, which are found in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. The study goes on to suggest that capsaicin is a potential therapeutic candidate for Alzheimer's disease and warrants clinical trials on chili peppers or capsaicin as a dietary supplementation for the prevention and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. An earlier study by the same team concluded that a capsaicin-rich diet consumption was associated with better cognition in people aged 40 years and over. So that's fantastic news for me. TRPV1 is present in many metabolically active tissues. This makes it a prime target for studies in obesity, type 2 diabetes, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Capsaicin treatment in mice fed a high-fat diet for 10 weeks lowered obesity, fasting glucose, insulin, leptin, inflammatory markers in adipose tissue, and liver and hepatic triglycerides. This is probably the most fascinating part of the research I did. The studies are ongoing and there are plenty of them. Capsaicin has been reported to decrease cancer cell growth, cell cycle arrest, and trigger programmed cell death in several cancer cell lines, including adenocarcinoma, breast cancer, colon cancer, cutaneous cell carcinoma, esophageal carcinoma, gastric cancer, glioma, hepatocellular carcinoma, leukemia, multiple myeloma, nasopharyngeal carcinoma, non-small cell lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, tongue cancer, and many others. It is also shown to exhibit anti-cancer activity by decreasing the progression of tumors in mice. Worldwide, gastric cancer is one of the leading causes of death by cancer, and several studies have shown that capsaicin can inhibit the proliferation of gastric cancer cells and promote their apoptosis, or programmed cell death. If you learned anything in this video, please hit that like button down below. It really helps the channel out. With the discovery of the TRPV1 receptor being relatively recent, the amount of research into the effects of capsaicin has significantly increased since 1997. It will be interesting to see what new discoveries are uncovered in the coming years. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it interesting. And until the next one, stay spicy. Hello and welcome. My name is Sean, also known as Chili John. In this video, I will share 10 facts about my favorite fruit, the chili. Fact number 9 is pretty mind-blowing. I went down a complete rabbit hole during my research for this, and I'm sure you're going to like it as well. Chili can be spelled in many different ways. In America, it's commonly spelled with one L, so that's C-H-I-L-I. In the UK, South Africa, Singapore, India, New Zealand, Australia, and many other countries, it's spelled with 2 L's, so that's C-H-I-L-L-I. In many Spanish-speaking countries, it's spelled with an E, so C-H-I-L-E. The one way that chili cannot be spelled is P-E-P-P-E-R. The reason that people call chilies peppers is thanks to Christopher Columbus. Back in the 1400s, when Christopher was doing his thing, black pepper or peppercorns were a hot commodity. They were hugely expensive and were often used as currency in many countries. Columbus, who was trying to find India, ended up in America. He returned to Spain with a bunch of chili plants that the Spanish monasteries continued to grow. After a little while, these chilies started to be used as a cheap substitute to black pepper. There are more than 50 species of chilies. The 5 most common are annuum, baccatum, chinense, protescens, and pubescens. There are also more than 50,000 varieties of chilies out there, and more are being created every year. In fact, if you want to learn how to make your very own chili variety, I'll leave a link down below to a video where you can learn just how to do that. Peppers, bell peppers, sweet peppers that you buy at the supermarkets are actually chilies. They are part of the capsicum annuum species. Today's video is a little bit special.
I'm going to be making the first big batch of a hot sauce recipe I've been working on for the last 2 years. And I think I've perfected it. It tastes delicious. I can't wait to get it into your hands so you can tell me what you think. And I'm going to show you pretty much everything about how it's made right after this. I get asked quite often, can you ferment dried peppers? And if so, how do you do it? Well, you're going to learn how to do that in this video. Over here we have some fresh peri-peri straight out of the greenhouse. And here we have some dried peri-peri. Now, I've been picking my peri-peri peppers as soon as they've been ripening, and I've been dehydrating them to make sure that I have enough for the sauce, because I've been planning this for a little while. I need to figure out how much these would have weighed before I dried them. Now, the easier way to do that would have been to weigh them before I dried them, but I didn't think ahead with that one. But there's another way you can do this, and you just need a rough estimate. Fresh peri-peri are 12 grams, and the dry peri-peri 2.8 grams. That'll be important for a step later on in the process. The first part of this process is to create a starter with these fresh peppers. Now what that means is we're going to be creating an environment that the lactobacillus is going to reproduce, and we're going to be able to use all that lactobacillus that's going to be created with a small amount of peppers to actually ferment the rest of the peppers that are dried. The reason we're doing this is because dried peppers are not going to have all the lactobacillus necessarily that is on here, the fresh peppers, and even if it does have any left, with the step that I'm going to be doing a bit later on in the process, I'm definitely not going to have any lactobacillus on there. So let's get started, let's get this fermenting, and we'll be able to continue with the process. Just go over the neck. Let's just squeeze out as much of the air as you can. The method I'm going to use to keep this submerged is something I've done in the past, and that is to use some sort of vegetable. Now, I've used onion in the past. I think I've used cabbage as well. I know I have, but I don't know if I've shown it on video. But that's what I'm going to be using today is some cabbage. Now, the reason I'm using cabbage is because lactobacillus is quite prominent on cabbage as well. And it's the same type of lactobacillus as you'll find on peppers or pretty much any plants, which is Lactobacillus plantarum. You don't want to go and get a starter culture from the health store or something like that, which claims to be lactobacillus. It is lactobacillus, but it's a different strain, and I prefer to just keep it somewhat natural, just to help the process along. So what we're going to do here is stick the cabbage there, and that should keep stuff below the liquid line. And for the airlock, I'm going to use some brine. And make sure that the bottom of the airlock does not touch the liquid, because all that will happen is when the pressure starts building in here, it'll just push the liquid up through the airlock and make a mess. So that is ready to start fermenting. I'm going to put a label on it, and we're going to stick that inside the fermentator. It's been a month now since we started this batch of peri-peri in the fermentator. And during that time, about 2 weeks ago, I started a second small batch of peri-peri. This one here I did inside my vacuum sealed bags, and I mashed it up, as you can see over there, and that is fermented nicely. You can see the air pocket that is created. Now it's time for us to do the next step, and this is where it gets interesting. This is where it's a little bit different, and I'm going to show you the method I'm going to use to be able to ferment dried peppers. Before we get started with the dry peppers, we're going to need to first process this over here. This is obviously already blended. I'm happy with that. This one here, however, we need to blend that up because I use whole peppers. So let's just open that up and give it a smell. It smells good, and you can see there's no growth on there, even though the cabbage looks a bit yellowed. It's actually perfectly fine. I'm going to take that out. Just need to get some gloves on. So we're going to get rid of this cabbage. That was just to hold this all down. I was just being ultra cautious, and I wanted the extra lactobacillus that was in there. So let's just get rid of that, because it's not part of the sauce. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take some measurements here of the pH, because I'm going to measure the pH throughout this process, just to make sure that what I'm going to be doing with the dried peppers is going to be, doing the right thing essentially. But to measure the pH, I'm first going to need to just blend this up. Now, typically, when I blend these peppers up, I would get rid of the brine, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want to waste any of the lactobacillus. Essentially, this is what I would consider a starter, and it's going to start the fermentation with the bigger amount of the dried peppers that we have over here. Oh, it's gorgeous smell. Wow, love it. So let's get this open as well. I'm going to add this in to this fermentation. Actually, of the brine that I've left inside there, obviously going to be diluting the pH, the lactic acid. So I'm going to add this into this. The thing we're going to do to help this absorb moisture is we're going to blend it inside this pot. So let me just get this started, and then we'll start blending it just to help this break down a bit easier, especially for when we're doing the actual fermentation. You should get this to a boil. There's another reason that we're putting this on some heat, not only to rehydrate these peppers, but it's also to kill any potential bacteria that might be existing on these peppers. Because they're as dry as they are, there shouldn't be too much risk there at all, but this just helps keep everything nice and safe. Once you've blended this up really well and you brought it up to a rolling boil, keep it like that for around about 10 minutes, and then you want to switch it off, and you're basically going to let it cool down a bit, because it's way too hot. It will kill the lactobacillus if you add in your starter. So you need to let that come down to around about 30 degrees Celsius. And what that allows it to do is just really kickstart the process and get the lactobacillus feeding on what's inside the pot. Of course, there are other ingredients going into this sauce. Now, I'm happy to share with you what those ingredients are. It's going to be on the bottle anyway, so I'm not hiding anything. But the amounts I'm using and the stage at which I'm adding these ingredients, that's something that I'm going to keep to myself, because I am trying to create a signature sauce here. One thing I will say is make sure that you add salt at this stage while we're rehydrating the peppers. The salt is standard practice for fermentation. Remember that we are still fermenting. We're going to be using the starter to ferment the dry peppers that we have just rehydrated here. So make sure you add salt. Standard practice, 2% to 3%, that's normally where I go for. I've gone a bit higher than that for this one here, and not for the fermenting side of things. It's not like you need more because of this process, but it's because I need more salt for the recipe I'm doing. Make sure you don't go above 8% salt. 8% and above, the lactobacillus is not going to be in the best place. So they prefer a range between about 2-3% and 8% as a maximum. So land somewhere in between and you should be fine. The other ingredients that are going to be in here, or maybe already in here, is turmeric, garlic, and a good quality white wine vinegar. So turmeric is an interesting spice. It has many claimed health properties that I'm quite fascinated with. There's quite a lot of research that's gone into turmeric and how good it is for you. But have a look online. I'm not going to go into details about that. Obviously, chilies have their own health benefits as well. That there's a lot of research done on that, actually, on capsaicin and the health benefits of chilies. But I think the combination of the turmeric with the chilies is going to make a lovely sauce, but it's also going to be potentially a bit of a healthy sauce as well. So do some research on that yourself. I'm not making any health. Wait for this to cool down. I'm going to put this in. that, look, let me get on with this, and I'll see you very soon. Let's see how the fermentation has got on, measure the pH, and get it ready for the next steps. That looks absolutely beautiful and smells amazing. I really can't wait to try this sauce once I've finished it off. But it's looking really good. Can't see any problems with it. And I guess the real test is to see what the pH is. That just looks perfect. I'm hoping the pH is going to be under 4 for what we've done here, and then I'll be a very happy man. I know I mention this every time I use my pH meter, but I have calibrated this. Make sure if you are going to be doing these sort of sauces that you not only have a pH meter, but you have a calibrated pH meter. So I did 2-point calibration, there's a pH 4 and a pH 7, and this should be ready to go. Give it a bit of a stir in there and see what we have. Wow. So I hope that's visible on camera. That should be there. 3.5. I am super, super happy with that. It gives me an extra confidence. I'm selling this stuff to you guys. Anything below 4 and I'd be 100% happy. But when I get down to that low, I know that I've had a very successful fermentation. So that's fantastic. We're ready to do the next steps. I'm not going to show all that because I've got a bit of work to do here. But basically, I'm going to be putting this into a bigger container, and I'm going to be mixing in the vinegar, and we're going to be blending that all up and leaving it to sit for a couple of weeks. I learned quite a few things during this process, and probably the biggest one, the biggest time saver, would have been to process the fermented peppers before adding them to the vinegar. So what I did is I added the whole peppers, all the mash and everything into vinegar. I blended it up and I stuck it away and let it sit and pull all the flavors out of the peppers into the vinegar and sort of, do its thing. That was a pain in the backside because when it came to actually using the food mill to get the liquid out of the whole mix, instead of processing just a small batch of, let's say, 2 kilograms of peppers, I'm instead processing, 4 kilograms because I'm including all the vinegar as well. And it just doubles the amount of time, especially if you're doing larger batches. So what I will do next time is I will use the food mill on the peppers themselves before I add them to the vinegar and get all the liquid out of them, really just, get as much as I can out of the peppers with that food mill, squeeze it right through, and then mix it in with the vinegar to make the whole process go a lot quicker. And I just doubled the amount of time that I spent on this because of that one step that I missed. The other thing I learned is these fermentations, when you add a starter to it, it really does a great job, and it kicks off that fermentation so quickly. There's no gradual fermentation. This thing just kicks into high gear almost instantly. Normally when you ferment, the first 3 or 4 days, the lactobacillus is multiplying, and it's getting to a point that it's starting to do its job and it propagates throughout the fermentation. When you add a starter directly to food, essentially, for the lactobacillus, which in this case were the peppers, the dry peppers that we added, the lactobacillus just goes on a feeding frenzy. The first or second day that this was going on, my bucket that I was fermenting in, it pretty much wanted to explode. It was expanded. I'm sure I have some pictures to show you up on the screen now, but it was nuts. And I couldn't actually, I had to process some of that stuff. I had to pull it out, put it into a smaller bucket. So I ended up having 2 buckets that I was working from. And yeah, that was a bit of a pain. So next time I'll definitely leave a lot more headroom at the top of the bucket, just to allow the process to kick in without it expanding and trying to blow out the airlock. So that was another lesson learned. Definitely take into consideration the fermentation is going to kick off a lot quicker when you add a starter, which is good, but it's also, just take into account. One other thing to point out is do not throw away your mash that you pull out of your sauce. So I have some over here, and this is going to be fantastic once I dry it out, and I'm going to actually make a lovely dry slice. I may be putting that up for sale, but we'll see. I'm sure my brother's going to end up wanting a bunch of it as well because he absolutely loves peri peri as much as I do. So we'll see how that goes, but I'll let you guys know. Yeah, don't throw away this beautiful stuff. It's not waste, and it's my tattoo, but what the Nyami Nyami actually looks like. And I thought this is just a perfect name because Nyami also means a lot of other things in various other African languages. One of them means to eat, so that's pretty apt for what this is. Enough of that. Let's get to tasting this and see where it lands on the heat scale. Compare the heat of this to this, then you should have a good idea of where this sits. First up is the Tabasco. So I'm just going to put a few drops in there. Such a great smell. Well, that's Tabasco sauce. Tangy vinegar, pretty much. I think that it's meant to be around, 3,000 to 5,000 on the Scoville scale. It's a delicious hot sauce, it really is. It's not going to blow your head off, of course. It's not meant to, but it's great tasting and it adds so much flavor to various meals. Now let's try this one. When I was making this sauce, I did think to myself, should I thicken it up, with xanthan gum, which I could have done. It is quite liquidy, just because of how it's made. Less liquidy than Tabasco, I think. But I ended up not adding any xanthan gum. I didn't really want to add too many additives. But we'll see what your feedback is with this first batch. And if it's something that you think it needs a little bit of thickness, then I'm open to suggestions, and I might change it for the second batch, or maybe make a alternate version of this which is a bit thicker. But let's give this a go. Oh, it smells really good. So let's try it out. I've just had the Tabasco. Ooh, boy, that's a lot. That's got a lovely texture. It really has. It's still hot. It's a totally different kind of heat. Tabasco burns pretty much straight away as you eat it. This one here, the sweetness of the white wine vinegar comes through, but then the heat builds up quite a bit. It's not a ridiculously hot sauce. It's a little bit hotter than Tabasco. I would consider this as a replacement for Tabasco in terms of the heat level. It has a very different heat profile.
Everybody has their own favorite hot sauce. Everybody. The main problem here is that you have to succumb to the overlords of hot sauce, the maker. But what if you are the maker?
Just chunk it up and throw it in there, right? So basically all you're gonna do is you're gonna place your chilies in a half-gallon mason jar, and separately you're gonna mix 1 1/4 quarts or 1,150 milliliters of water, filtered ideally, and 51 grams or 3.5 tablespoons of fine sea salt. Then just pour your brine in the mason jar down so that they're submerged. Find a way to make sure to keep them submerged under that brine. I use a little ramekin, just kind of pushed it down in there and filled it with water and back up underneath. You know, whatever works. You can also use a plastic bag filled with water. And then you're just gonna let it sit at room temperature for anywhere between 5 days and 2 weeks. Now you may notice a white webby film appear on top of it. This is very different from mold. This is actually called commies. It's totally safe. Mold is fuzzy. Fuzziness is bad. So that's how you can tell it. And that's literally it. That's all you have to do to ferment these. Just let them sit. It's very low effort. You'll also notice the brine start to turn cloudy. Totally normal. Don't worry about it. Now, once your peppers have reached the point that you think they're ready to go, up to your taste, then you're going to strain them through a mesh strainer or a chinois, preserving that brine. Don't throw it away. And then now is the perfect time for you to show up my new blender. I'm the proud owner of a vine. You know, this is a live event. It's a big deal. Okay, we'll talk about it later. Okay, maybe the blender flex was a little premature because there's actually some stuff we have to do first. So to make this hot sauce, you're going to take 8 cloves of garlic, peeled, thinly sliced, and you're going to put it in a small saucepan with a half a cup of neutral tasting oil, like no oil. Now, toasting garlic is a very delicate process. It's very easy to go from delicious to absolutely horrible. So pay close attention. So over medium-low heat, you're just going to cook this bad boy and let them sort of lightly fry in that oil just until they can turn about golden brown. Don't let them get too brown, just a little golden brown, you know, a little bit. Then you're just going to strain that through a fine mesh strainer and reserve the oil and the garlic separately. So now, on the blender top, you're going to combine all that toasted garlic, just your fermented peppers, not the brine, half a cup plus 2 tablespoons or 150 milliliters of white vinegar, and 3 tablespoons or 42 milliliters of your peppers brine. Then you're just going to start blending that on high speed. Now, once it begins to turn a little smooth, you're going to stream in half of your oil from your toasted garlic. So a little bit of toasted garlic oil action, you know what I'm saying? And then a little bit of salt to taste, and give it a taste. You know, does it need more vinegar? Does it need more salt? Ideally, they should be balanced at this point, but hey, maybe for your taste, you want some more salt. And that's it. Additionally, you can also push this through a chinois or a fine mesh strainer to get it even more smooth, and just cool it down and put it in your refrigerator, and you've got hot sauce. You have your own lacto-fermented hot sauce. It really is that easy. So I figured I would put my hot sauce to the test by making buffalo wings. This sounds right. So to do that, you're going to take 2 pounds or 1 kilo of chicken wings, 2 teaspoons of 10 grams of baking powder, a little bit of salt to taste, toss that together in a bowl, place it on a baking sheet lined with a wire rack, and a pro tip, place foil on the bottom, please. You'll thank yourself. Then you're just going to bake those at 425 degrees Fahrenheit or 218 degrees Celsius, that's right, for 30 to 40 minutes. Now, I'm not just going to sit around during that time. No. We're going to make our buffalo sauce. Now, to do that, you're going to need 2.5 tablespoons or 35 grams of unsalted butter, a quarter cup or 60 milliliters of hot sauce, for one to eat, 2 dashes of Worcestershire sauce, that's totally optional, half a tablespoon or 10 grams of honey, and a small pinch of salt to taste. Then just bring those up over medium heat, stirring often just until it starts to come to a boil, remove it from the heat, and well, that's it. Just make sure that you're stirring it so it emulsifies together. And well, that's actually it. At that point, I think you know what to do. Take cooked chicken wings, put them in a bowl, drizzle in all that buffalo sauce, toss it together, and well, you're done. You can add a little more salt if you need it, and that's buffalo wings with our own hot sauce. You can take a very special level of ownership over that. Now, I know I said that there would be a special outro, but before we do that, there's one important thing, and that is welcome to Hot Wings. Okay, not gonna get the whole shit. First thing, I'm sorry.
We would never have cash around just to have cash. I mean, we would never think that we should have a cash position of X percent. And frankly, I think these asset allocation things that tacticians in Wall Street put out, about 60% stocks and 35%, we think that's total nonsense. So we want to have all our money working in decent businesses, but sometimes we can't find them, or sometimes cash comes in unexpectedly, or sometimes we sell something, and we have more cash around than we would like. And more cash around than we would like means that we have 10 or 15 cents around, because we want money employed, but we'll never employ it, just employ it. You will any good, and it might interfere with the opinions we have that are good. If we're right about a business, if we think a business is attractive, it would be very foolish for us to not take action on that because we thought something about what the market was going to do or anything of that sort. Because we just don't know, and to give up something that you do know and it is profitable for something that you don't know and won't know because of that, it doesn't make any sense to us, and it doesn't really make any difference to us. There's nothing magic. We like to put a lot of money in things that we feel strongly about. And that gets back to the diversification question. We think diversification, as practiced generally, makes very little sense for anyone that knows what they're doing. Diversification is a protection against ignorance. I mean, if you want to make sure that nothing bad happens to you relative to the market, you own everything. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's a perfectly sound approach for somebody who does not feel they know how to analyze businesses. If you know how to analyze businesses and value businesses, it's crazy to own 50 stocks or 40 stocks or 30 stocks probably, because there aren't that many wonderful businesses that are understandable to a single human being in all likelihood. And to have some super wonderful business and then put money in number 30 or 35 on your list of attractiveness and forego putting more money into number one just strikes Charlie as madness. It's conventional practice, and all you have to achieve is average. It's a confession, in our view, that you don't really understand the businesses that you own. On a personal portfolio basis, I own one stock, but it's a business I know, and it leaves me very comfortable. Do I need to own 28 stocks in order to have proper diversification? It'd be nonsense. 3 wonderful businesses, more than you need in this life to do very well. The average person isn't going to run into that. I mean, if you look at how the fortunes were built in this country, they weren't built out of a portfolio of 50 companies. They were built by someone who identified with a wonderful business.
Much of what is taught in modern corporate finance courses is twaddle.
Volatility does not measure risk. And you're going to run into that. I mean, if you look at how the fortunes were built in this country, they weren't built out of a portfolio of 50 companies. They were built by someone who identified with a wonderful business.
Much of what is taught in modern corporate finance courses is twaddle.
Volatility does not measure risk. And the problem is that the people who have written and taught about risk do not know how to measure risk. And the nice thing about data, which is a measure of volatility, is that it's nice and mathematical and wrong in terms of measuring risk. It's a measure of volatility, but past volatility does not determine the risk of investing. I mean, actually, take it with farmland here in 1980 or in the early 1980s, farms that sold for $2,000 an acre went to $600 an acre. I bought one of them when the banking and farm crash took place, and the beta of farms shot way up. And according to standard economic theory or market theory, I was buying a much more risky asset at $600 an acre than the same farm was at $2,000 an acre. Now, people, because farmland doesn't trade often and prices don't get recorded, they would regard that as nonsense. That my purchase of $600 an acre of the same farm that sold for $2,000 an acre a few years ago was riskier. But in stocks, because the prices jiggle around every minute, and because it lets the people who teach finance use the mathematics they've learned, they have, in effect, they would explain this away a little more technically, but they have, in effect, translated past volatility in terms of all kinds of measures of risk. And it's nonsense. Risk comes from the nature of certain kinds of businesses. It can be risky to be in some businesses just by the simple economics of the type of business you're in. And it comes from not knowing what you're doing. And, it is, if you understand the economics of the business in which you are engaged, and you know the people with whom you're doing business, and you know the price you pay and is sensible, you don't run any real risk. And I don't think Charlie and I, certainly Berkshire, I don't think we've ever had a permanent loss
in marketable securities, it was, what, 1% maybe, 0.5%, remember? I made a terrible mistake in buying Dexter shoe, which cost us a significantly more than 1% of net worth, where I bought an entire business then. But I was wrong about the business. It had nothing to do with the volatility of shoe prices or leather or anything else. It was wrong. But in terms of market security, I cannot recall a case where we've lost it. I mean, we've done a lot of things in securities that have a very high beta. We've done a lot of things in securities that have low beta. It's just the whole development of volatility as a measure of risk. We never found a way for it to be useful to us.
Most corporate finance or investment management courses, as taught in major universities, we would argue it's at least 50% quality. Yet these people have very high IQs. One of the reasons we've been able to do pretty well is that we early recognize that very smart people do very dumb things, and we try to figure out why. And I also want to know who, so we can avoid them.
It's a temperamental quality, not an intellectual quality. You don't need tons of IQ in this business. I mean, you have to have enough IQ to get from here to down, not all, but you do not have to be able to play three-dimensional chess or be in the top leagues in terms of bridge playing or something of the sort. You need a stable personality. You need a temperament that neither derives great pleasure from being with the crowd or against the crowd. Because this is not a business where you take polls, it's a business where you think. And then Graham will say that you're not right or wrong because 1,000 people agree with you. And you're not right or wrong because 1,000 people disagree with you. You're right because you're facts and you're reading and you're right. But probably the best investment you've made in yourself. That, for example, communication skills. I told the students in the company that they're going to graduate schools and business and they're running all these complicated formulas and all that. If they just learn to communicate better, both in writing and in person, they increase their value at least 50%. If you can't communicate, somebody says, it's like winking at a girl in the dark. Nothing happens, basically. And you have to be able to get forth your ideas. And that's relatively easy. I did it myself with the Dale Carnegie course. Some people wish I'd taken a shorter course now. I'm pretty much walking clear on. But it's just hugely important. And if you invest in yourself, nobody can take it away from you. If I gave you a car, I'd give you the only car you can, the rest of your life, you take care of it like you can't believe. I mean, you scratch it, fix that moment, you read the owner's manual, you keep a garage, all these things. And you get exactly one mind and one body in this work you can have. And you can't start taking care of it when you're 50. By that time, you're a little rusted out if you haven't done anything. So you should really be curious to remember that you just got one mind and body to get through life with, and you won't do it. We think the best way to minimize risk is to think. And the idea that you have, you say, I've got 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds, and then have a big announcement, now we're moving it to 65-35 is some strategist or whatever they call them in Wall Street. But that has to be pure nonsense. I mean, 60-40 or 65, it just doesn't make any sense. What you ought to do is have your default is always short-term instruments, and whenever you see anything intelligent to do, you should do it. And you shouldn't be trying to match up with some goal like that. I found it entertaining. I was just reading yesterday an article, I think it was about the two fellows at Google and all of the problems they're going to have because they're each going to get a few $1 billion. And I mean, it was. I mean, I want to send a sympathy card. I almost went down Hallmark store because this article went on. They got this terrible problem, that terrible problem. They're going to need lawyers and they're going to need financial. They don't need anybody. Those guys are smarter than the people that are coming to them, and they do not have a big problem. And they're very capable of thinking it through themselves. The people that have the problem are the people who want to sell their services to them and are going to try to convince them that they have a problem. But so much of what you see when you go about asset allocation, it's just merchandising. It's a way to make you think that if you don't know how to determine whether it should be 60-40 or 65-35, if you need these people, you don't need them at all in investing. And most of the professionals that tell you that you're going to get in great trouble unless you listen to them and sign up for their services, they're good at selling. But Well, my brother-in-law, former brother-in-law that worked with the stockyards used to say, with the people were bringing cattle or something, and I'd say to them, how do you get the farmer to employ you to sell this sweat or armor or cut of hay instead of the guy right next to me? It's a cow, and farmer's gonna buy it the same way. And he gave me this disgusted look, and he said, Warren, it's not how you sell them, it's how you tell them. Well, there's a lot of that in Wall Street.
People have always had this craving to know the future. The king used to hire the magician or the forecaster, and he looked in sheep guts or something for an answer as to how to handle the next war. And so there's always been a market for people who purported to know the future based on their expertise. And there's a lot of that still going on. It's just as crazy as when the king was hiring the forecaster who looked at the sheep guts. And when people have an economic incentive to sell some nostrum, it can be sold over and over and over again. The really interesting figures are when you combine the underperformance of the market, say by the mutual fund industry, which is probably a couple points per annum, that understates it. Now, if you take all of the investors in the mutual funds who are constantly whipsawing from one fund to another by a bunch of brokers who want commissions, now you take a subnormal performance and it goes down another 3 or 4 percentage points due to the shuffling of the mutual fund investments. So the poor guy in the general public is getting a terrible result from contacting the experts. And these guys are hitting the scout troop and the community chest drive and are locally reputable people. I think it's disgusting. It's much better to make a living by being part of a system that delivers value to the people who are buying the product. But nobody refrains from creating gambling casinos or something on my theory. If it will work to make money, what I intend to do it in this country.
Desire people to gamble, and they gamble in stocks incidentally too. Day trading, I would say, very often came very close to gambling as defined. But people like to gamble. It's if the Super Bowl is on, or even better yet, if a terribly boring football game is on, but you don't have anything to do, and you're sitting there with somebody else, you're probably going to enjoy the game more if you got a few bucks on it one way or the other. The human propensity to gamble is huge. Now, when it was legalized only pretty much in Nevada, you had to go to some distance or break some laws to do any serious gambling. But as the states learned to, what a great source of revenue was, they gradually made it easier and easier and easier for people to gamble. And believe me, the easier it's made, the more people will gamble. When my children are here, and 40 years ago, I bought a slot machine and I put it up on our 3rd floor. And I could give my kids any allowance they wanted as long as it was in dimes. I had it all back by nightfall. I thought it would be a good lesson for them. And now, they weren't going to Las Vegas to do it, but believe me, when I was on the 3rd floor, they could find it. And my payout ratio was terrible too, but that's the kind of father I was. But gambling, people are always going to want to do it. And for that reason, I particularly think that to quite an extent, gambling is a tax on ignorance. If you want to tax the ignorant, people who will do things with the odds against them, you just put it in, and guys like me don't have to pay taxes. And I really, I find it kind of socially revolting when a government preys on the weaknesses of its citizenry rather than acts to serve them. And believe me, when a government sticks locking on it, I've already said the growth and value, they're indistinguishable. They're part of the same equation, or really growth is part of the value equation. So our position is that there is no such thing as growth stocks or value stocks. The way Wall Street generally portrays them as being contrasting asset classes. Growth usually is a positive for value, but only when it means that by adding capital now, you add more cash availability later on at a rate that's considerably higher than the current rate of interest. So we calculate into any business we buy what we expect to have happen in terms of the cash that's going to come out of it or the cash that's going to go into it. So if you tell me that you own a business that's going to grow to the sky, and isn't that wonderful? I don't know whether it's wonderful or not until I know what the economics are of that growth, how much you have to put in today, how much you will reap from putting that in today later on. And the classic case again is the airline business. The airline business has been a growth business ever since the Orville took off. But the growth has been the worst thing that happened to it. It's been great for the American public, but growth has been a curse in the airline business because more and more capital has been put into the business at inadequate returns. Now, growth is wonderful as seeds candy because it requires relatively little incremental investment to sell more pounds of candy. So it's growth, and I've discussed this in some of the annual reports. Growth is part of the equation, but anybody that tells you you ought to have your money in growth stocks or value stocks really does not understand investing. Other than that, they're terrific people. And the real point is that we're trying to put out capital now to get more capital. Money, we're trying to put out cash now to get more cash back later on. And if you do that, the business grows, obviously, and you can call that value or you can call it growth, but they're not two different categories. And I just cringe when I hear people talk about now it's time to move growth stocks to value stocks or something like that, because it just doesn't make any sense.
In general terms, unless you find the prices of a great company really offensive, if you feel you've identified it. And by definition, a great company is one that's going to remain great for 30 years. If it's going to be a great company for 3 years, it ain't a great company. I mean, so you really want to go along with the idea of something that if you were going to take a trip for 20 years, you wouldn't feel bad leaving the money in with no orders with your broker, no power of attorney or anything. You just go on the trip and you come back and it's going to be a terribly strong company. I think it's better just to own them. I mean, we could attempt to buy and sell some of the things that we own that we think are fine businesses, but they're too hard to find. We found See's Candy in 1972, where we find here and there we get the opportunity to do something, but they're too hard to find. So to sit there and hope that you buy them in the throes of some panic, that you sort of take the attitude of a mortician, waiting for a flu epidemic or something. I mean, I'm not sure that this will be a great technique. It's a lot to count on. And, if you start with the Dow X and you think it's too high, when it goes to 90% of X, do you buy? Well, if it does, and it goes to 50% of X, it gets, you never get the benefit of those extremes anyway, unless you just come into some accidental sum of money at some time. So I think the main thing to do is find wonderful businesses. So we've had our share of flu epidemics, but you don't want to spend your life waiting around for them.
Well, people said cash is king a year ago. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, cash wasn't producing anything, and it was sure to be down value over time. And then you always want to be sure you have enough. I mean, it's like oxygen. You want to be sure it's around, but you don't need that. You don't need that excessive amounts of it around.
How Warren Buffett thinks and stuff.
Maybe you've seen that the market is down at the moment. That's just plain wrong. If you intend to choose this investment for the long term, there's a risky and bad practice to base your stock selection on price. In actuality, the necessary initial action is to, step 1, find companies you understand. What stocks does Warren Buffett steer clear of first? Buffett steers clear of undertaking uncharted investments. This is precisely why Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio lacks a significant amount of high-growth technology firms or biotech stocks. We're not suggesting they don't have potential or are awful companies, but Buffett is aware of his best stock-picking areas. Investing in too complicated investments, in the opinion of Buffett, is one of the simplest ways to make a mistake that could have been avoided. Most of us have worked in a small number of industries throughout our whole lives. Having said that, we presumably have a very good idea of how the specific marketplaces function and who the top corporations in the region are. But the big majority of publicly traded businesses operate in industries in which we have little to no expertise. But don't get us wrong, this does not mean that you should avoid making financial investments in these market segments. We're just saying that you should proceed with caution. Just remember that there are too many fish in the sea to get hung up on studying a company or business that is just too hard to understand. Step 2. Know you're betting on yourself. It's imperative that you comprehend the game you're playing before you start coming up with a strategy for being the next Warren Buffett. By choosing to select individual equities, you're placing a wager in your capacity to outperform the general stock market and produce greater returns. This is quite challenging to accomplish. After 5 years, 84% of professional fund managers whose sole responsibility is to outperform the index have failed to do so. 95% of managers fail at the task after 20 years. Choosing to select individual equities, you're placing a wager in your capacity to outperform the general stock market and produce greater returns. This is quite challenging to accomplish. After 5 years, 84% of professional fund managers whose sole responsibility is to outperform the index have failed to do so. 95% of managers fail at the task after 20 years, according to S&P Global's SPIVA US Scorecard Research. Maybe there's a better chance for retail investors? They don't, as it turns out. In the 24 years between 2000 and 2021, the S&P 500 grew at a 9.5% annualized rate. The average investor earned just 3.6% annually, barely outpacing the 2.2 tax levied by inflation, according to JP Morgan Asset Management. The poor actualized returns of average investors are mostly the result of psychological errors like overtrading, purchasing when equities are up, and selling when they are down. So although this principle may be the least appealing, it is also the most crucial. You're exercising a little vanity and choosing to go against the odds by deciding to pick stocks rather than investing in a low-cost index fund that automatically generates market returns, such as the Vanguard 500 index fund. Step 3. Determine whether a company has a competitive advantage. Now that you're considering a whole bunch of companies and their competitors, it's time to start narrowing down the list. The most important thing to look for in a company is a sustainable competitive advantage, or what Warren Buffett calls moat. The key to investing is not assessing how much an industry is going to affect society, or how much it will grow, but rather determining the competitive advantage of any given company and, above all, the durability of that advantage. Buffett said in a 1999 interview with Fortune, "The products or services that have wide, sustainable moats around them are the ones that deliver rewards to investors." A moat can come from several different sources, learning about how factors such as scale, switching costs, unique brands, intellectual property, and the network effect can give a company a strong advantage over its competitors will help you identify them in the companies you're researching. Step 5. Determine a fair price for the stock. After narrowing down the list of stocks you're considering to companies with a strong competitive advantage, it's time to start looking at stock prices. There are a lot of ways to evaluate a stock's current price and whether or not it presents a good value. Here are a few. Price to sales ratio. A PS ratio is more useful for growth stocks that are profitable or produce very unstable earnings. Again, historical averages can be a good guide, but be sure to factor in future expectations. Importantly, not all sales are created equal. A company may come out with a new product or service that produces a much different profit margin than its core business, but accounts for the majority of its revenue growth. As a result, investors need to adjust their expectations for how the stock should price relative to future sales. Price to earnings ratio. The PE ratio takes a company's share price and divides it by its earnings per share over the past year. Investors can find stocks trading for a good price when the PE ratio falls below its historic average. This metric is best used by well-established companies producing steady profits and growth, but there may be a good reason for a stock to trade at a higher PE ratio than it has before. If earnings growth is expected to accelerate over the next few years, investors should be willing to pay more per dollar of profits. Remember, stock prices are determined by future expectations. The past can only be used as a rough guide. Discounted cash flow modeling. If you really want to get into the weeds, dig into the financials of a business and start making projections for revenue growth, profit margin, and other expenses for the next several years. You use those projections for revenue and operating expenses to develop a model for future earnings. Discount those cash flows by your required rate of return, and you'll have an estimate of the stock's value. Divide that by the number of shares outstanding, and you'll have a reasonable stock price. Dividend yield. If you're focused on income, the dividend yield is another important metric to consider. If the dividend yield is above average for a stock that could of a business, and start making projections for revenue growth, profit margin, and other expenses for the next several years. You use those projections for revenue and operating expenses to develop a model for future earnings. Discount those cash flows by your required rate of return, and you'll have an estimate of the stock's value. Divide that by the number of shares outstanding and you'll have a reasonable stock price. Dividend yield. If you're focused on income, the dividend yield is another important metric to consider. If the dividend yield is above average for a stock, that could indicate it's trading at a good price. However, be sure you don't fall into a yield trap. Sometimes dividends are unsustainable, so be sure to check how safe the dividend is based on the company's payout ratio as a percentage of earnings and free cash flow. And be sure to look forward and check that the earnings and cash flow are sustainable and growing. You may even develop your own dividend discount model for projecting dividend growth over the next several years. Step 6. Buy a stock with a margin of safety. The last step to stock picking is to buy companies trading below your estimate for a fair price. This is your margin of safety. In other words, if your valuation is wrong, you're preventing big losses by buying well below your fair price. That's another key to Warren Buffett's success as an investor. For a stock with stable earnings and a strong outlook, you might not need a wide margin of safety. Take 10% off your target price and you'll probably be fine. For growth stocks with less predictable earnings, you may want a wider margin of safety. Aim for 15% to 30%, depending on how confident you are in your valuation. That ensures that if things don't go as expected, for example, if the young company faces a new challenge or a larger company decides to enter the market, you will be protected because you bought your shares at a relative value. There's no need to get the absolute lowest price possible for a stock. Trust yourself that you did the research necessary to make a good decision, and when the price looks good, take it. If you follow the above steps and build a diversified portfolio of stock picks across several sectors, you'll be sure to find some winning investments. Well, that's about everything. Hopefully this guide, along with Warren Buffett's advice,
Hello, my name is Jeff Colbeck, and I'm from Olathe, Kansas. I got started in investing in 1999, right before the big tech bubble. And unfortunately, I learned buy and hold and don't fret about market price fluctuations before I learned the importance of valuing a business and applying a margin of safety. So, as Charlie said, I got my feet wet with huge failure right away. And thank you. I feel so bad now. So that leads to my question. It seems like to me, I've read all the Berkshire reports and all the reading I can do about you two, and I thank you for these wonderful meetings. But it seems like it boils down to some simple things: valuing a business and applying a margin of safety. So my question is, what do you recommend for an approach to getting better and better at valuing companies?
That was a very, very good question. And in my own case, I started out without knowing anything about valuing companies. And then Graham taught me a way to value a certain type of company that would prove successful, except the universe of those companies dried up. But nevertheless, it was almost a guarantee against failure, but it was not a guarantee that these things would continue to be available. Charlie taught me a lot about the value of a durable competitive advantage and a really first-class business. But over time, I've learned more about various types of businesses, but you'd be amazed how many businesses I don't feel that I understand well. The biggest thing is not how big your circle of confidence is, but knowing where the perimeter is. Over time, I've learned more about various types of businesses, but you'd be amazed how many businesses I don't feel that I understand well. The biggest thing is not how big your circle of confidence is, but knowing where the perimeter is. If you don't have to be an expert on 90% of the businesses, or 80%, or 70, or 50, but you do have to know something about the ones that you actually put your money into. And if that's a very small part of the universe, that still is not a killer. And I think if you think about what you would pay for a McDonald's thing, what you think you would pay for, think about the businesses in your own hometown, laughing. which would you like to buy into? Which do you think you could understand their economics? Which do you think will be around 10 or 20 years from now? Which do you think it would be very tough to compete with? Just keep asking yourself questions about businesses. Talk about with other people about them. You will extend your knowledge over time. And always remember that margin of safety. And I think you basically have the right attitude because you recognize your limitations. And that's enormously important in this business. You will find things to do. 6 or 7 years ago, maybe not that long, 6 or 7 years ago, when I was looking at Korean stocks, for example, I didn't have any idea Korean stocks would be something that I would be buying. But I looked over there and I could see that there were a number of businesses that met the margin of safety test. And there I diversified because I didn't know that much about any specific one. But I knew that a package of 20 was going to work out very well, even if the Crook might run one of them and a couple might run into competition I didn't anticipate because they were so cheap. And that was sort of the old learning approach. You will find opportunities from time to time, and the beauty of it is you don't have to find very many of them. Charlie?
Well, obviously, if you want to get good at something, which is competitive, you have to think about it a lot, and learn a lot, and practice doing it a lot. And the way the world is constructed in this field, you have to keep learning because the world keeps changing and your competitors keep learning. So you just have to get up each morning and try and go to bed that night a little wiser than you were when you got up. And you keep doing that for a long time and accumulate some experience, good and bad, as you try and master what you're trying to do. People who do that almost never fail utterly. They may have a bad period when luck goes against them or something, but very few people have ever failed with that. If you have the right temperament, you may rise slowly, but you're sure to rise.
Did you take any business courses in school?
None. I took accounting.
And when did you start guiding businesses? And how'd you go about it?
When I was a little boy. I can remember I would come down to the Omaha Club, and there was an old gentleman who would hit the Omaha Club about 10:30 every morning. He obviously did almost no work, and yet was quite prosperous.
He became your ideal, huh?
Yeah, so, well, but I'll club about 10:30 every morning. He obviously did almost no work, and yet was quite prosperous.
He became your ideal, huh?
Yeah, so, well, but he made me very curious as a little boy. I said to my father, how in the hell does he do that? And he said, Charlie, he's at a business where he enjoys practically no competition. He gathers up and renders dead horses. Well, that was an example of avoiding competition by one stratagem. And if you keep asking questions like that of reality, starting at a young age, you gradually learn. And were you doing the same thing?
Well, yeah, thankfully he went beyond his original insight there. But
I noticed another interesting, you take the rulers of the businesses when I was a little boy, an awful lot of those businesses in Omaha, a lot of those businesses went broke, a lot of them sold out at modest prices under distress, and some of the people who rose, like Kiewit from small beginnings, nobody thought of as the great glories of that early time. And I think that's kind of the way life is. It's hard to get anywhere near the top. It's hard to hold any position once you've attained it. And but I think you could predict that Kiewit was likely to win. They cared more about doing it right. They cared more about avoiding trouble. They put more discipline on themselves.
well, if you knew the individual well, you would have bet, right?
What?
If you knew the individual,
I would not have bet on any of the people I knew who were already wealthy. But I would have bet on Pete Kiewit. His sister taught me math. and no, half Dutch, half German, this is a tough culture. And
You just heard it, folks. Half Dutch, half German.
well, but
Go out looking for them.
well, the man was recommending this as being wonders. Anyway, no, I don't think it's that, but here, I was just automatically doing that. What was working? What was failing? Why was it working? Why was it failing? You have that temperament, you are gradually going to learn. And if you don't have that temperament, I can't help you.
If you followed Pete Hewitt around for 10 years, you never would have seen him do anything dumb, right?
Oh, yeah. So
It's avoiding the dumb thing. You really don't have to be brilliant, but you have to avoid just sort of almost seeming obvious mistakes. But I would say that you're on the right track back there, and in terms of having the basic fundamentals, knowing your limitations, but still seeking to learn more about various kinds of businesses. Surely, I think when he practiced law, any client that came in, Charlie was thinking about that business as if he owned the place, and he probably generally thought he knew more about the place than the guy that actually owned it. It was his client, that was the client. But